You're listening to Trek FM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we look forward to seeing you there. The 602 Club proudly presents Snyder Cuts, a Zack Snyder Directorial Podcast, and I am just one of the hosts here, Matthew Rushing, and with me, as he is every single week on this journey, is the one and the only John Mills.
Hey, everybody. It's been a while. It's been a long time, hasn't it?
It's crazy that, you know, we're like 2 months past Zack Snyder's Justice League coming out? Like, it's
Is
crazy.
it really that long already?
Because it was March, right?
Yeah. That's nuts.
It's insane.
I hope he has something in production right now so that we don't have to go that long again.
Seriously. Well, I mean, the rumors that he had taken his Star Wars idea and de-Star Warsified it to create an idea just as a possible movie is interesting. And, we also know that he has sequel ideas for this movie that we're about to talk about tonight. So, hopefully he's got stuff in the pot. But before we dive into talking about Army of the Dead, which we're so excited to get to, I mean, honestly, John, as you're mentioning, this kind of is the end of this journey until the next thing comes out. I don't know if necessarily we'll talk about, the animated series that goes along with this because I don't think it's Zack directing that. And so, but True. The next Zack Snyder movie that comes out, he directs, will definitely fire up the old Snyder Cuts again. And so, this will be the last episode for a while. So if you like what the show's doing, make sure you keep track of us. Wherever you get your podcasts, we're in the 602 Club feed here on TFM. Make sure you subscribe so you get the shows as soon as it drops. You can also, of course, give us a star rating review over on Apple Podcasts to help the show grow. We'd really appreciate that. We're on Twitter, so you can keep track of everything that's coming out here in the 602 Club over at the 602 Club on Twitter. That's just that simple, at the 602 Club. You can also find us, of course, on Instagram at the 602 Club TFM. We're on Facebook with the entire network at Trek FM, which is facebook.com/TrekFM. We've got the listeners-only discussion group you can find there called the Babel Conference you can join. We've also got the website, Trek.fm, and you can go to the contact section there. And if you would like to send John and I an email about Snyder Cuts, you can just choose the 602 Club, and that would come to us. So that's pretty exciting. And last but not least, if you would like to support the network because you like what we do, go to patreon.com/TrekFM and see how you can be part of our team and just make sure all of these quality podcasts keep coming to you. So, this one, John, is obviously interesting because neither of us had seen this one before. It's brand new. It just dropped on Netflix. So I was just kind of wondering for you what your first experience was with the movie. Because I don't think you got a chance to go see it when it was in the theaters for about a week.
No, I didn't. I wanted to. And actually, so I would say that your first experience with it is probably the more interesting one because my first experience was sitting on the couch eating some Paul Newman's pizza with a soda. So, and I did pop some popcorn too. But, seriously, that's my first experience with it. What was it like seeing this in the theater? Like, was it a larger than life experience? Did they put you in one of the bigger theaters or one of the crummier theaters?
I would say that this was a very nice sized theater, not one of the largest ones that they have, but a good one. It wasn't like one of the rinky-dink ones. And I was actually surprised to see how many people were there. In fact, I was standing in the concession line, and a gentleman was standing behind me, and he was talking to one of the people working behind the concession line, and, they were asking him what he was going to see, and he said, Army of the Dead, and he's like, yeah, I just, I was checking to see what was playing tonight, and I saw Army of the Dead, and I was like, oh, I'll watch that, so it was kind of neat to hear that, this is something that obviously Netflix did no promotion for it really being out in theaters. The only promotion we saw was from Zack Snyder himself on Twitter, and of course the army of fans that he has. Maybe he should make a movie called Army of the Fans. So, I mean, And then when I got into the theater, I was actually surprised. The theater I went to was in the Portland area, which is still kind of much more COVID restricted right now. And there were still quite a bit of people that were in the theater. So it was a good showing, I felt like. And it was a fun experience. It was really fun to see the movie with people the first time because people were reacting to different things. You get that thing where people are like, oh my God, screaming profanity because something like scares them or whatever. And then, in this type of movie, that's fun. That's kind of what you want. I remember going to see The Quiet Place for the first time, and some girl behind me literally, like, she jumped out of her chair. I could feel it because something scared her so badly and, screamed the F word. And it was just, that's funny, in a movie like that, right? That's kind of what you're hoping you get. So that was, the experience was really good, and it looked beautiful on the big screen.
Based on that experience, do you think that Netflix should have had a longer play window with this? They should have had it going longer before it dropped on Netflix, or do you think that they should have just leaned into it more? Because to your point, they didn't really advertise it. I had so much trouble finding a theater playing it down here that you actually did the internet search while I was at work, and you were like, oh no, it's playing over here. It was like one theater where it was playing around here that was a good, 35 minutes away from me. And trust me, when you have kids, that's a long round trip.
Heck, even for me, that's the same way. That is a great question, and I think it is a detriment to Netflix that they don't try this a little bit more often, because I do think, there is something special about watching a film on a big screen. And I would say that Zack definitely made this movie with the big screen in mind and not necessarily Netflix. He made this movie just the same way that he makes all of his movies, which is to be experienced in a very large format. And so, I'm some of the other streaming services will, because I know Amazon has done this too, where they have movies that will come out in the theaters in limited release, and then it'll show up on Amazon. And I don't know. I do think Netflix is kind of missing out, and I honestly think that they kind of missed out on the fact that they could have made just some good money on this just by doing a little bit of promotion, even just on social media alone, and letting people know, hey, we got a fun new movie for you to go see in the theater. It's a crazy idea, and you'll love it on the big screen, So I do kind of think that they kind of missed an opportunity here to get more people interested. So
now you mentioned that the theater, the people were getting into it and everything. So at the end of the movie, without tipping off your own reaction or anything, what was the audience's vibe? Were people walking out laughing and saying, oh, I really like that? Was this one of those things where it had the vibe where, again, if it played for a little bit longer, this would become a hit because word of mouth would power it? Was that your impression coming out of the theater, or was it more subdued where it was like some people loved it, some people were sort of just walking out of the theater like whatever?
The feeling that I got in the theater throughout the entire experience was that people were enjoying the movie, that they were responding to it in the correct ways, like the or like laughing at the right places, the jokes, or enjoying it when the bad guy gets eaten by a zombie tiger, or kind of cheering when that happens. So people seem to genuinely have responded to the film in the way that you would want. I didn't catch anybody kind of laughing at the places where they're laughing at the movie instead of with it,
Sure.
And so I from that experience alone, obviously anecdotal, but it did seem like Netflix kind of passed on some bucks where, look, the way Netflix's business model works is kind of like the United States government. It seems like money is no object, and that can't last forever. So I feel like that they are missing out, and something like this with a premier director, in the same way that, I think that they may have put like Mank in the theater for maybe 1 week or something, so
if they did, I don't remember.
These premier directors, though, it does seem like it's not a bad idea to like put it in some theaters. You let it make some money for a couple of weeks and recoup something. And then, the majority of people will go see it, still probably on Netflix, but
well, I mean,
I don't know why
it would make sense because the sunk cost is already there, and
exactly.
Basically becomes marketing, at that point. And it's also, I think, lower yield movies. I'm not saying that right, but like with the sunk cost thing, no matter, they're not going to make back their money most likely, but at the very least, it's a good way to sort of plumb the depths and find out how willing people are to. At this juncture, how willing people are to go back and see something, right? You can sort of test the waters with something like this and see, are people interested? Are people going for it?
Right.
That sort of thing.
I mean, you think about, like Godzilla versus Kong did great. And it was on HBO Max, but it was also in a lot of theaters. And it did really, really well, not just in the United States, but around the world. Obviously, those films also have a huge international audience because international audiences, like American audiences, just love two monsters beating the crap out of each other. But, I mean, It does show that with the right movie, you can have it on streaming, but you can also have it make a lot of money in the theater. And so I think, a good zombie flick is something that kind of transcends, it seems like. So I absolutely agree with you. There's no reason I wouldn't say to just try it, and see how it goes. But, I mean, again, Netflix has their own business model, which nobody really seems to understand. So who knows?
Least of all them. So
it's true.
Okay. So knowing also as part of this journey, I had seen Dawn of the Dead before you, and you're not really a blood and guts kind of guy when it comes to movies. That's a fair statement. Essentially, we talked about his, his music videos and stuff like that before, but his first real movie is Dawn of the Dead. So it feels, in a sense, especially in terms of Snyder Cuts at this point, that we've come full circle. We started with a zombie movie, we're ending with a zombie movie. And so my question to you would actually be this, because I'm trying to wrestle with it too. Same type of material, right? Same type of genre. Where do you see growth from Snyder comparing like to like, right? You can't compare Dawn of the Dead to Justice League or Owls of Ga'Hoole to Watchmen or anything like, they're just different.
Right.
But you can compare Dawn of the Dead with Army of the Dead. Mm-hmm. Where do you see growth from Snyder when you compare those two things?
So what's interesting is, you saw in Dawn of the Dead that Snyder kind of evolved from the original film and kind of added his own little spin. Mm-hmm. And I think in Army, he's continued that trend in the sense that he added his own little spin in Dawn, and now in Army, he's one-upping the game for zombie movies in the sense that he's not content to just leave things be in the sense that I'm just going to make a generic zombie movie. No, he really wants to add something to the genre. And I think that's something to which, I do think you can kind of compare to some of his other works in the sense that he is willing to take a genre and then add his own take on it, add his personal stamp to it, and there are things in Army of the Dead that nobody else has done with a zombie movie, and places and ideas that nobody else has really necessarily played with. And I think that's something that, this whole movie is very experimental for him. And I think it shows that he's willing to continue to experiment as a filmmaker and not allow even himself to get bored.
Where do you see technically him stretching his wings? Where do you see? Because again, we have Dawn of the Dead, we have Army of the Dead. Where do you see him having visually evolved? Where do you see his use of camera having changed? Where do you see his color palette? Those sorts of things. Where do you see growth there for him?
Yeah, so much has been made in this movie about the fact that he used these 1960s Canon Dream lenses that then they rebuilt and housed, for the Red camera, because Red contacted him and like they wanted to see if he wanted to, make his next movie on Red, and he'd never shot on digital. And so I thought it was really interesting. I think obviously Snyder got the camera, started playing with it, and loved it. And so him being willing to evolve past film, I think, is one place where we really see technically, camera-wise, Snyder really willing to grow. As much as I love Nolan, he's never going to give up film. But Snyder here is willing to surpass film in the sense of like to try something new. And I also think no other filmmaker would have I'm going to say it, the absolute balls of steel to take these lenses to which nobody knows how they're going to work in a camera, and to not know whether the movie is going to really truly ever be in focus in the way that we would normally see a film focused. And this movie surprised him in the sense that he's said multiple places where, things were much more in focus than he thought they were going to be. But still, he's really playing with depth of field with his camera work. And, of course, he's the DP in this movie. So he went back to his own roots. So, I mean, like, that's the thing I'm really interested for you, too, like, to answer this question, because Zack is like, he's gone all the way back to his roots of being everything in the production.
Right.
And, I mean, this might be the most Zack Snyder movie of all Zack Snyder movies, because it's all him.
It's interesting because I think that there are definitely people that are going to be they're going to have points of contention with the visuals in this. This is typical for Snyder. The question is, where do you see a director? It's like, you can tell this is a Zack Snyder movie because the camera work is unique. The color palette is what you expect from modern day Snyder. And so, like, you could look at Dawn of the Dead and then this, and Dawn of the Dead, the saturations are turned up a bit. Yep. He hasn't moved away from the saturations by that point. I think that his tribute to Larry Fong in the movie is great. Fantastic. For anybody, do we want to spoil it or just encourage people to go back and look for it?
I don't want to spoil it because it is really fun.
Yeah, it's when they first get into Las Vegas. Pay attention to the higher parts of the buildings. And I think that there are visual moments that really shine. There are other moments where I'm not entirely certain that it's as successful as he felt it was. There are a couple of close-up shots where they're very interesting at first, and then he uses them a little bit more, and it's like, okay, it doesn't sustain the same way. But they're like, the first time you see it, you're like, oh, that's an interesting looking shot. And then it happens a couple more times. You're like, but it's not that interesting, and a lot of them have to do with like close-ups and stuff. I think that story wise is where I see, I don't want to say growth, but evolution, I guess, changes with him. Dawn of the Dead is a very straightforward movie. It was written by James Gunn. But of course, we all know directors have a hand in how the final script shapes. And with him involved in the writing process in this, you see somebody who is, in fact, trying to put something together that's a little more complex, something that's got a little more going on. And to your point, there are some really unique things in terms of a zombie movie, right? This idea of different tiers of zombie, that there's an actual society that functions. And in a sense, it's almost lifted from Blade, where you have the fully functioning vampires, and then you have the people that never quite come out of the stupor, and so they're sort of just like mindless zombies. So this has that sort of, hierarchy. Because you have the alpha, who's the original zombie that escaped, and then, the different tiers of zombies. There are a couple of things where I think that his showmanship works against him a little bit. Example would be like the robot zombies. Not robot zombies, but they're cyborg in some way. And I know that is most likely to help set up some sort of a connected universe here, but it's one of those little tidbits that's frustrating not to explain by the end of this, or at least drop some sort of hint, like have Tanaka at the end have a file folder talking about and you see it sitting on his desk, and it's got experiments with zombies or something, and you find out that they've been doing et cetera, et cetera. And to that point, and I wanted to ask you about this, is in terms of the story structure, well, I thought there was a lot interesting going on here. I thought that it suffered from too much being packed in, that there was a little bit too much going on, especially as it wound down toward the end. It lost a little steam for me because there was just so much on top of everything else. And some motivations got a little murky. Did you have that same impression, or were there any story points where you were like, they could have done without that?
It's interesting because I do think that the story point with his daughter's friend doesn't quite get played out well enough, because the whole thing goes awry because his daughter leaves, right? Like, they literally lose it all, and everybody ends up dying pretty much because of her and her going after this one person. And it's a little bit frustrating, obviously. And at the same time, that is the trope of the zombie film, right? Somebody doing something kind of dumb and it getting a lot of people killed, In fact, I think of in Dawn of the Dead, when she runs out, after the dog, I think it is, right? That's the same type of thing. It's a little more successful here in the sense that she's going after an actual human being, instead of a dog. But at the same time, the story doesn't quite work because there isn't that moment when the helicopters crash where she's actually even looking for her friend,
right,
who is so important. And I think if you had even just had her because she does look at, I've seen this twice now, she does actually look in the helicopter. She's looking at Tig's character, right? And you could tell maybe you just needed to show a glimpse of the mangled body of her friend just to let you know that she didn't make it either, and I think, or
at least a reaction shot, reaction shot of her 100%. Oh no,
100%. I think that alone would have helped that story feel more cohesive, and more legitimate, in the sense of you spent so much time on it, and it's again the thing that makes everything fall apart, and then we don't really do anything with it afterwards, I don't know if I would say this, it's never completely makes me dislike the movie or get really frustrated with the movie. There are just some tweaks that I wish, might have happened for some of these things to be maybe just a little bit cleaner. Well,
no, and I think that's very fair, because I have in terms of story structure, there's a lot here, and there's a lot very interesting here, but not everything here was necessary. And to your point about the trope, you could make the argument, well, it would have shown a little bit of growth on his part to say, well, this is the part where the idiot runs off and causes everybody to die. I'm not going to do that here, right? To roll it back,
right.
Because he had control of everything.
Yeah, yep.
With Dawn of the Dead, you're in that weird territory of somebody else wrote the script, and he had the power here. But I do think that there's so much interesting that I think in retrospect, when people see this, when they peel it apart, intellectually, especially the beginning part, about how he seems to be making a very relevant statement about how easy it is for the government to abuse powers that it's given in an emergency situation.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And that, I think, is a particularly resonant theme, no matter what period of history you're alive in. But you could make, certain arguments about some of the things he's postulating here that are interesting. Very interesting. Agree or disagree. They're very interesting questions to put out there. And that's why I would give them a lot of credit, is because of the fact that he's the only director that I've seen right now who is asking some of those questions in his movies.
Sure. Yeah.
And it endears pieces of the movie to me because of the fact that he's willing to put it out there.
Right.
He's willing to, go out on a limb.
Well, and so one of the things that I think is one of the most fascinating questions for me is look, we know that this zombie, the original Alpha, Zeus, comes from Area 51, and it's being transported somewhere, and we don't know where. We just know it's being transported from Area 51, and we get the feeling like, of course, that possibly, when you connect the movie, it's being transported maybe to Tanaka and his group for testing, because it seems as though they've been working on this zombie for the purposes of kind of creating some sort of super soldier, possibly. Like, this is super soldier serum gone wrong. This is like the zombie Captain America. And, I kind of love he plays with the whole idea of him being a superhero anyway, Zeus with the cape and all and stuff. It's very evocative of like a zombie Superman or Bizarro Superman.
And he even has a mask.
Yeah, so. It's great. But I think the thing that makes that so interesting is that we learn, later on in the film that really Tanaka is most interested in getting a sample of this. So it makes you wonder, what has the government been doing in their experiments with this? And is this a response or an accidental creation because they have had alien technology? They even make the joke because the guy who played Jimmy Olsen in BVS, is in the truck, and he's talking about aliens, and so is that part of this too? Is that and so like I love all of the things that Zack is like postulating in just very few amount of scenes that raise so many great questions to which you can go a million different places with in this. And to me, I think that's what sets this apart and makes it even better than Dawn, because it is a much more intellectually stimulating zombie film than that one, because we're asking a lot more questions. And then on top of the questions you mentioned, I feel like those are things to which really excited me as I watched this movie and really responded to.
Yeah, to be sure, though, I do want to be transparent that there are, for all of these things that we're talking about that we do like, there are things that I think were problems that could have been solved in the writing stage. And one of the things is I think that probably my desire to see some things cut out, as I do think the movie is a bit overlong. I think that it's much more entertaining if he keeps it tighter, if he gets us in and he gets us out. I think that there are a lot of interesting dynamics with the team, but that the team is a little too large for me to be emotionally invested with any of them. And so I think that could have been whittled down a little bit to increase the tension between characters by maybe merging and reassigning a couple of roles here and there.
Sure.
And I think that what is fascinating is the moments where it really seems to come alive, which is an ironic thing to say because it's about the undead, are really those moments like the opening credits where that is Zack Snyder. That's the Snow Steam Iron Zack Snyder.
Yeah.
You know, where I'm looking at it and I'm saying, this is a short film all its own. This is really interesting what's happening right here. I don't have any dialogue. All I have is sound effects and music. And I know everything that's going on. And it's interesting and it's curious and all of these things. And it really is interesting because in that opening credits sequence, he told me everything I needed to know over the duration of the credits. And then he seems to slow down so much with the rest of it that I wish he would borrow some of the energy from that type of sequence and say, hey, I have a faster way to tell this story over here, and condense it down to, you know, maybe even, you know, like an hour 55 or maybe 2 hours 5 or something like that. Do you agree? Do you disagree?
I didn't mind the length too much, except for the fact that I had to pee during the movie, which was terrible. I do think that there is a way, I think in the recruitment stage of the team, you could have sped that up and you didn't need to be quite so long. And I really, but there is a part of me, it almost is like Zack enjoyed, obviously, the experience of, his Justice League, where he really got to kind of spend some time with the characters. And I think, his whole process here was, he wanted you to kind of feel for some of these characters. So I think it works best to me when we're still spending time with Batista and his relationships, with his daughter, and this woman that he thought he lost the ability to kind of be in a relationship with forever. I think those are the things that really work the best there, and I like the time we spend there. And I do feel like pretty much everything else you could have whittled down a little bit, but I'm not going to get too upset about that, really, because having seen this movie twice, I personally just really enjoyed the ride I was on, and the world he created, and all of the questions he was asking. And so it continually, it's kept me engaged twice, and I think that's a good thing. I am going to cede to you, though. Absolutely, I do feel like there could be places where you could have tightened some things up, and I think it would have helped to have tightened a few of the editing choices, so that the story. And okay, let me postulate this. I honestly kind of think that you could have, they do the whole thing where they tell you what's going to happen before it happens, like I don't know if you needed that. It's fun, but I don't feel like it's necessary. And that's a good 3.5 minutes alone that, like, it makes for some fun visuals, but it's not, because we're just about to go in and do the thing anyway.
Right.
I don't necessarily need that sequence to tell me what it's going to be like, because, again, this is a zombie movie, and we are playing with all these tropes, so I definitely get it. So, yeah, I
just think he could have transferred the energy here and there.
Sure.
Speaking of building the team, though, everybody knows that Tig Notaro was not originally in the film. I don't even know the name of the person that they replaced or whatever. I wanted to ask you specifically about that. Do you think that the digital edition mapping of Tig Notaro was successful overall? Were there any shots where you looked at it and you said, okay, I can see the edges there? Or do you think it was as we've joked about behind the scenes, as I love to call it, the CO Bibble technology?
Yeah.
Because in Attack of the Clones, Oliver Ford Davies had a theater engagement. He was only in one scene, so they filmed the scene with the Naboo Council without him, and then they took a portable blue screen and mapped him over the poor actor that essentially got booted out of Attack of the Clones then. So we see this full fruition of the technology. Do you think it was 100% successful, or do you think it was mostly successful, or was it glaring?
So This might sound odd to people. I didn't know that she wasn't originally in the movie. I hadn't read that previously.
Cool.
I hadn't kept up with all the behind the scenes on Army, and part of that was because I was kind of so focused on all the stuff going on with Justice League. And I was just excited, that Zack was making this movie and everything. So I didn't really know that. So having seen this on the big screen and at home, to me, it works pretty great for the fact that they're having to put her into scenes that she was never in. She's never with Batista, right? So, and Tig's funny. She's just real funny. I think she adds a nice levity to every scene that she's in a really good way in the film. And I'm very glad that it was her. I think, as she says, 100%. I'm in.
Yeah.
I liked it. I loved it, and I didn't really see anything. Part of that is I didn't know, and so I wasn't looking. So I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I was looking because I knew.
Sure.
I think that it was greatly successful. The only time there were a couple of shots that it jumped out at me. There's one shot in particular, and it's because I was obsessively paying attention. I was like, can I see the seams? There's one shot where like she's more in focus than everybody else, and so you can tell that it's
right.
Not native to what was shot on set. And then there's one shot where they're first coming in and everybody is fanning out at first, and she's off on the right hand side of the screen, and she looks almost like a piece of paper pasted, but it's a background shot. And if I wasn't looking directly at her, I wouldn't have known or cared. So I think that this is a hugely successful effect. I think it's unfortunate that they felt it had to be done, because, this would have sunk the production if they couldn't do this, right?
Oh, right. Yeah.
And so the fact that they could is fantastic. It gave us the ability to do this, and the thing is, it sets me even further down now because again, Attack of the Clones uses it. Christopher Lee was never on set with Hayden Christensen in episode in Revenge of the Sith, and so it's becoming more and more a part of our filmmaking lives.
Yep.
But what's really interesting is you go back through film history, and so many actors who didn't work out or died during production or this or that. And now it's within the filmmaker's ability to go back and map like this. And it's an amazing and terrifying tool at the same time. And what's terrifying about it is when he was asked about how much it cost to do, he said it was cheaper than making the zombie tiger. And I'm like, wow, really?
That's impressive.
So yeah, that's pretty incredible. And I want to ask you about that because the zombie tiger is obviously fully CG. Do you think that type of CG effect was fully successfully realized, or were there moments where you were looking at it and you were like, this is a little ambitious?
This is one of the places where I think that the technology that he was using camera-wise and the lens helped, because any imperfections you can almost play off, and your brain can play off as it's part of the focusing effect, right? And but I thought the zombie tiger was great. One, it's just such a funny idea. You're in Vegas, and that, one of Siegfried and Roy's tigers would get turned into, a zombie. And it's an incredibly cool idea. I mean, and only Zack Snyder would think of that, right? Like, Zack Snyder's mind, just like, what would be coolest here?
Yeah.
A zombie tiger. And so I loved it.
What I give them credit for is the fact that the tiger behaves the way a cat does.
Yes.
When all of the zombies are rushing over at one point and the tiger is rushing along with them, and then it just jumps up on a car and it sits down and it yawns and it just starts resting. I've owned cats in my life, and that is exact zip, 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 zip. Okay, I'm resting now. Like, it was so cat-like that I loved it. I thought it was so fun that somebody knew cats well enough that they could put something in there so that people who understood cats would say, oh, yeah, okay, that's a thing. That happens.
And they did something really cool with Zeus's horse. That's a real horse that they created a bodysuit to wear to make it look like that, which I thought was incredible.
It looked amazing.
Yeah.
It really looked amazing.
Probably cheaper than creating a digital thing anyway, too. So I do want to go back a little bit because I do want to dig just a little bit into, obviously, the camera effect. And I have to say that for myself, especially on the big screen, I really loved this effect because I felt like it was really beautiful. And in many ways, I felt like the shallow depth of field helped us kind of have an emotional and a visceral reaction to how everybody is reacting almost in this movie, which is a lot of people are acting within a very shallow depth of field. Like they're doing these things for maybe not the best reasons, not always the deepest reasons, like Tanaka, he's doing all this for money, the president of the United States wants to blow up on the 4th of July because it'll be, quote, really cool. We've got, people like Theo Rossi's character, who the basically the rapist guard. He is the shallowest depth of field of character who's just taking advantage of the situation. Like, and I just, in some ways, I felt like, to me, thematically, that lens and the way that it was shooting things kind of really helped bring home a lot of what was going on, like internally and just in the whole situation as well. So to me, I loved it, and I just also loved the fact that we had a director who was willing to play around with things, because we know Zack is creating not just film but art. Like, and he, as an artist, he's playing with basically a different set of paints to see what happens.
I think that it is very visually cool. I don't dismiss what you're saying there. I don't know that it was successful in connecting with me that way in terms of bringing me to the characters. I thought again, it was very visually cool. It's very stylized. I expect that from a Zack Snyder movie. But I don't know that any of the visual tricks, cues, methods would be enough to sort of overcome the fact that I didn't really feel a strong connection to enough of the characters, which again, I think is a product of the ensemble cast. Not that they were bad actors and actresses, but the fact that there were so many of them with so many motivations that were, Tanaka's motivation is questionable, because there's no reason, and I know that it's very easy to say, well, that's not why you're watching it. And that's very true. I'm watching it just to have fun. But that to me was a sign of the fact that it was having trouble engaging me as much as it wanted to, is that there were moments where I would pause and say, well, that doesn't really make sense. Like, if you give me a minute to slow down and start doing that, that means that you're sort of losing me a little bit. Now, at no point does it lose me completely, right? Because there is an ebb and flow to this movie where it is funny enough at certain points that I laugh and that brings me back. Or it's tense enough. When they're going through the hibernating zombies, that's a really interesting sequence.
Yes.
I enjoyed that. I thought that was very interesting and very well done. When I think that the very odd thing is that there seems to be more sympathy from Snyder at certain points for the zombies, especially the alpha, than there is for the humans.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if it's sympathy, but it seems like he's just so much more interested in the zombies.
Yeah.
That the people are adornments to their story.
And I think that's pretty much on purpose from what I've heard from him in many ways. He talked about how what we see the human characters doing are all these kind of very motivatedly selfish things, continuing the worst of humanity. And in the end, with the zombies, what do we see? They've kind of created a society that doesn't have any war. Nobody's killing each other. And they're kind of at peace in this place. And they're figuring out a way to try and evolve as well. And in some ways, I think what Zack Snyder's ultimate purpose in this movie is to show us the error of our ways by helping us realize that we almost care more about the zombies in this film than we do the humans in this film. And that there's something wrong with the fact that we would do that, because none of the human characters are in here are really, most of them are not being driven by the best of human motivations. Right. And whereas the zombies are. And I think that's this is the place where I think Zack kind of twisted things on its head completely. And when we're talking about growth, I think this is one of the ways that Zack's grown. He's taken the genre, to which can have some sort of social commentary, and flipped it around so that I almost want the zombies to win more than I want the humans to win, because it's like, we're in many ways, humanity has already turned itself into what we think of the worst of zombies. And yet the zombies themselves have turned themselves into something that almost seems better when put together.
Well, yeah, I don't know better, because
you know what I'm saying. Like I mean thematically. I don't necessarily
right.
mean like in reality.
Yeah, I know there are a couple of downsides with being perpetually rotting and
yes, like being out in the sun too long, and you just basically
shrivel
have
up.
to wait till it rains to maybe possibly come back. So,
well, it's one of those things where I think that this movie owes a lot to Aliens, with that whole thing, because that's that's sort of the point, with Burke, where it's like you don't see them screwing each other over for a percentage, and that's very much a purposeful homage, no question.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I think that Snyder throws some interesting curveballs in terms of possibilities having to do with, they find the other team, and one of the members is wearing the same key that the female member of their team is wearing, and they have that whole question about maybe this just all happens over and over again. We're caught in a time loop.
The ring cycle.
Right, exactly. And so that's interesting. I just think that there were opportunities during the development and editing that could have just truncated and condensed this. You could have put, because the thing is, everybody knows the hotels in Las Vegas are enormous. They're cities unto themselves. And instead of having, she has to go run across, get to the other tower, and they have to fly a helicopter, and somehow Zombie King makes it over there with a horse, in the same amount of time. If you condense that to, there's one giant hotel, and the zombies are all in this wing, and they have to work their way through, and that's where they, and I'm not trying to rewrite everything. I'm giving this as an example of how you could condense it, or could have condensed it, so that things would have moved more quickly, and we would have been closer to that 2-hour target instead of the 2.5 hours. And again, I'm not trying to rewrite, and I'm not trying to say Zack Snyder should have done it my way, right? This is just me sort of riffing in my head, saying, well, on the spot, how would you condense it? It's like, well, you could do something like that, right? But at the same time, I don't ding it too hard, specifically because I came to this because I wanted to watch a fun zombie movie romp, and I got more out of it than I bargained for. I thought I was going to get Dawn of the Dead, and instead I got Army of the Dead. It's sort of like the difference, honestly, between Night of the Living Dead and the original Dawn of the Dead. It's more complex. They start postulating more. There's a little bit more interesting stuff going on with the zombies in it. The people are disparate. So that original 1970s classic is sort of to, that original 1970s classic is to Night of the Living Dead what Army of the Dead is to Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead. So I think that's interesting in and of itself.
So I do have a question here before kind of we get to the ratings, because, and I don't think this really necessarily gives away what we think of the movie, but does the movie do enough for you that you are interested in kind of what they're going to do with an animated series that's a prequel and then a possible sequel if people like this movie enough?
Yes, because I think it's a little clumsy the way it's handled. There are certain questions that are left at the end of this that I would like to see answered. Not the least of which being, I saw at least 2 zombies that looked like they were cyborgs. And I want to know what the hell is going on with that. Right? So that's super interesting. That's a question that's dangling there. What's going to happen at the end when he gets to Mexico City? Also interesting to me. So yes, there's enough here. I can tell you that if anybody recalls, this is not the first time Netflix turned to a known quantity action director to try to kick off a franchise. Michael Bay had 6 Underground. 6 Underground was awful. I'll never watch it again. And if they release a sequel to it, it can go straight to hell.
Can I just say that movie is, and I wouldn't say this lightly, but that movie's trash.
I would say garbage. Garbage has rotting food in it. Trash is just sundry items. Yes. But this, I'm interested enough. I'm presuming you are. You're interested enough to see a sequel and a prequel and stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is enough here to which I was pulled in with. And, what I think is really interesting too is that, with the sequel possibilities, you have an opportunity to have a whole new cast as well.
Yes.
And I think that's really cool for the most part. Obviously, you might have a couple of repeat characters, but then the rest of this is going to be new people, which you can bring in, which I think is kind of neat. Almost like a Cloverfield type of thing where, everything's loosely connected. Well, before we got to Paradox, but, things are loosely connected. So that's a neat idea for me as well. And in fact, that actually seems to be almost, in some ways, what Snyder is kind of going for in this whole universe that he's created with Army. And it's just kind of exciting to see something that's it's a totally new property that I have no idea what possibly is going to happen. Like, this isn't connected to anything else. That's cool.
True. Yeah, I agree. So then we're at the ratings, aren't we? We're going to unveil to the world on a scale of 5 zombie queen heads.
Yes, got to go with the queen head.
How many zombie queen heads?
Yeah, for me, this is 4.5 out of 5. And
wow.
The reason that is because that I'm not a huge zombie type person, but I will watch this movie repeatedly because I really enjoyed the film, because there's so much more to it than just quote unquote like a zombie movie. And for me, that makes it a really successful film in what it's trying to do. And I think I really loved, personally, what Zack was doing visually, the way he was playing around with things, with the camera work alone, but of course with, the depth of field with the lenses. And I just thought that this was, to me, an incredibly successful film when it comes to the zombie genre. And, I enjoyed it much more than I did. I mean, and I remember we both liked Dawn of the Dead at 3.5 stars. That's where we were. This one just took that possibility to me and raised the stakes. So it's like now I have some pretty high stakes of what I'm kind of hoping for with a movie in this type of genre. So to me, just because of all what it does personally with the genre, I'm really impressed, and I'm definitely looking for more. So yeah, 4.5 stars for me.
I don't end up that high. There were a couple of story problems that I think could have been resolved earlier on. There were a couple of motivations that wound up not really working within their own context here and there. But like I said, there's a lot of interesting stuff happening. The action is great. The nonverbal stuff that Snyder does is interesting. The opening credits have stuck with me the whole time. And there's some new technology that's really interesting to see, and I had a good time with it. In terms of a star rating, I would probably wind up somewhere. Like I was talking with somebody else, and they were like, "Where would you wind up with it?" And sometimes I switched to different scales. I was like, "Yeah, this is probably about a B- or C+ for me." Right? It's a passing grade. It's good, and I enjoyed it. So I will likely end up with 3.5 because, as I think about, he's saying some interesting things in the beginning. He's got real flair for the visuals as usual. I think that the zombie society he's setting up is intriguing. I think that the social commentary that he has is worthwhile. And I think that, there's enough happening that I had a good time. I thought the action was staged really, really well. And if there's a sequel, I'll watch it. But how often do I see myself coming back to Army of the Dead? I don't know yet. So I'm going to go with, let's call it a soft 3.5. I am going to rewatch it just to see if it slides on that scale at all. Mm-hmm. But for right now, I'm at a 3.5.
Nice. I mean, and in the grand scheme of things, that's still pretty good. So
yeah, it is. You know what? He's he hasn't lost any ground from his first film.
Yeah,
if you look at the ratings, so there you go.
So of course, the question then we have to have is what we'd rank our Zack Snyder films, and so I could start if you'd like. I'll start from the bottom. It's of course Dawn of the Dead at the bottom there. With like we've called it the respectable 3.5, and then I would go with Owls of Ga'Hoole, and I rated that 4.5 stars. So where it gets really messy is I would say there's pretty much a tie for the most part. They're all pretty comparable, but after Ga'Hoole beat Army of the Dead. And then it's Sucker Punch. And then it's Watchmen. And then we get to 300, Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, and of course, Zack Snyder's Justice League at the top.
What people need to remember is I never think to go and write down the rankings that I had before.
It's true. He doesn't.
No. Anything that smacks of effort, I break out in hives.
Mine's on Letterboxd. That's how I know.
Yeah, I don't know. I wrote it down somewhere. It's on a piece of paper, probably scribbled, possibly some barbecue sauce on it somewhere along the way. I don't know. But if we're talking about rankings, we all know that I love the extended cut of Sucker Punch. So,
right.
It's up there with 300. Like those are I just adore those films. And everybody knows I loved Zack Snyder's, the Snyder Cut of Justice League. Mm-hmm. And I think probably Man of Steel wound up there. And then the Ultimate Edition of Batman v Superman was somewhere around Watchmen. I know this is frustrating. It's like, just give it a spot. I don't know. I would say Army of the Dead is sitting comfortably in that sort of bottom third area, whatever that looks like on my list. I think the ultimate question with it sitting down there is, since it has the same star rating, would I watch Dawn of the Dead again, or would I watch Army of the Dead again? And I can say hands down, I'll watch Army of the Dead before I'll watch Dawn of the Dead. So that in and of itself says to me that regardless of what sort of absolutely messy spaghetti I'm making out of this rankings thing right here, that Dawn of the Dead remains where it was, down at the bottom, a respectable, first movie capper. And Army of the Dead at least is at least one slot above that. So that's good. And when you're talking about movies that I've ranked everywhere from 3.5 to 5 stars, that's still good. It's not like I'm saying that, the two movies that are in the quote unquote bottom 2 slots are like The Room,
right,
or a Neil Breen movie or something like that.
No, I mean,
these
not
aren't
at all.
Riff Tracks movies. This is a good movie.
No, I mean, at 3.5 stars, it's above average.
Yeah.
By 1.5 stars. So I mean, no Zack Snyder movie has fallen below average for you.
Yeah.
Which is pretty impressive from a place where, as we started this journey, we've talked about, I don't know if you even imagined that would possibly be the case.
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all. I mean, I was open to having my mind changed, but yeah, I came into this, a typical person. It's like, Zack Snyder sucks. I can't. And I've done a 180. So, and again, for all I know, I'm going to watch Army of the Dead again. And I'm going to be like, no, it's a solid 3.5. Or I might, who knows? It might slide up, down, whatever. But at the very least, even when Snyder isn't making a 5-star classic like the extended version of Sucker Punch, he's still making something really interesting and worth seeing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and so
I think you're right.
That's why he's a director I'll always pay attention to.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are very few directors right now that I think deserve the attention. And, in the sense of like that you would legitimately follow and or watch anything that they direct, and Snyder for me is definitely in that category along with Nolan. And in all honesty, I think, there's very few other filmmakers where I'm like, I legitimately just will watch anything they direct because I just want to see what it is. The only other one that I can think of that's the case that's still making movies right now is you guys just talked about on House Lights, which was Wes Anderson, where I've seen all of his movies because I love Wes Anderson films, right? Some are more successful than others for me, but, I legitimately, if a movie comes out that he does, I'm going to see it. And so, but that's a very small list. And so, I think part of that is just because, there are so few directors who are truly trying to expand and really they are working to make art. And so this has been an incredible journey, and I'm really super excited that we do have something else in the works, John. It's going to be coming out later this year.
Yeah, that's right.
And should we tease it now for everybody so they can just kind of get hyped?
Let's go ahead and tease it. We've inhabited the DC universe enough with Zack Snyder, and we're going to assemble ourselves to discuss a series of very popular films later this year. And we hope everybody will join us for the ride for Assembling Avengers, which is going to be our little foray into everything from Iron Man through... I don't, how many movies am I signing up for on this?
Well, I mean, let's see. This year alone, we have 3 movies
50,
coming
60?
out. Yeah,
something
like that. But it is going to be fun. We are going to take a journey, and this is going to be, I think, a great retrospective because we just to promo it. We both come from a place where we love some Marvel movies and we don't enjoy as much some Marvel movies, and our goal here is to we've kind of gotten away from the hype at this point, so it'll be fun to go back and to try and judge these movies on their own without the hype, and just how do they live up in the pantheons of cinema. And I think that's going to be a really, really fun journey. And I'm actually very excited about it. So this is going to be coming to you here in the fall. We're going to be hitting the ground running with Iron Man and then making our way through the Marvel series. So I can't wait.
Do I have to watch Iron Man 2 again?
Yes, you do.
Oh,
it's part of the pantheon. So,
oh boy. Oh boy.
So, John, if people do, though, want to catch up with you before we reach Assembling Avengers, where can people check you out? What else have you got going on?
Oh, I'm Kessel Junkie on your social network of choice. Find me on Letterboxd. I have a lot of fun over there. I have an acid tongue with movies that I don't like, so buckle up. And you can find me over on the Nerd Party Network, co-hosting a show called House Lights, where we look at the work of directors from beginning to finish. Not finish necessarily if they're still alive, but their entire body of work up to that point. And also on the Nerd Party, I'm co-hosting Aggressive Negotiations, a different type of Star Wars podcast with you, Matt Rushing.
Yes, which is a blast, and hope people will check that out. Of course, here on the network, you can find me doing the 602 Club, which is our General Geek show. It's the same feed you find Snyder Cuts, so I hope you'll check that out. And also doing The Orb, as well as Literary Treks. The Orb is about Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and Literary Treks is about the books and the comics of Star Trek. On social media, I'm all over the place with Matt Rushing 02, so please do check me out on any of the platforms. Just search for that moniker, and you'd find me if I'm on that platform. And then over on the Nerd Party Network, finished Owlpost with Dre Kaufman. We went through every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time, so I hope that you will check that out. But thank you so much for joining us.
This is Snyder Cuts.